It was, as Captain Hastings later declared with some indignation, the most public murder in England. And yet it was the one no one truly understood. The terrace of Waverly Court shimmered beneath the brilliance of an unseasonably warm April sun. The estate, a sweeping Georgian manor set amid manicured lawns and blossoming magnolia trees, had been opened that afternoon for a charitable fête hosted by its owner, Sir Alistair Waverly. London society had answered the invitation enthusiastically. Crystal glasses chimed, silk gowns rustled like whispered secrets, laughter drifted over the marble balustrades and across the clipped hedges of the lower gardens. At precisely 4:30, Sir Alistair Waverly rose from his chair at the centre table. He lifted his glass. "My friends," he announced warmly, his voice carrying easily over the polite applause, "to generosity, to friendship, and to the future." He stopped. For one fleeting instant, confusion crossed his distinguished features, and then he collapsed forward onto the linen-draped table. The glass slipped from his hand, shattered against the stone terrace, and a spreading stain of deep crimson bloomed across his immaculate waistcoat. There was a second of frozen disbelief. Then came the scream. Sir Alistair Waverly was dead before his body struck the ground. And every one of the 43 guests present had seen him die. What none of them had seen, what no one could explain, was how. There had been no gunshot, no visible assailant. No one standing near enough to strike him. He had simply fallen. And yet the wound in his chest was unmistakable. A single, precise puncture directly above the heart. By 5 o'clock the terrace had transformed from a scene of festivity to one of strained whispers and tightly controlled panic. Inspector James Caldwell of Scotland Yard stood stiffly near the body, which had been respectfully covered with a white tablecloth. His square jaw was set in visible irritation.
This is impossible," he muttered to his sergeant. 40 witnesses, broad daylight, open terrace, no weapon recovered, no one approaching the victim, and yet the man is stabbed." "Could it have been thrown, sir?" the sergeant ventured. "Thrown?" Caldwell snapped. "From where? There's nothing within 20 yards high enough for concealment, and no one reports seeing an object in flight." Indeed, the terrace overlooked nothing but immaculate gardens descending in gentle tiers.
The hedges were trimmed to mathematical precision. There were no trees nearby large enough to conceal a person, no balconies above, no adjacent buildings. Sir Alistair had stood alone. And then he had died. The guests had not been permitted to leave. They were gathered now in the drawing-room, a grand chamber of pale blue silk walls and towering windows, their earlier gaiety replaced by a suffocating unease. Each of them had seen the murder, and yet none could explain it. Among them sat Lady Evelyn Waverly, Sir Alistair's elegant but visibly shaken wife, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mr. Benedict Harrow, Sir Alistair's business partner, whose sharp eyes betrayed calculation rather than grief. Miss Clara Waverly, the victim's niece and sole remaining blood relative, pale but dry-eyed. Dr. Marcus Levin, the family physician, who had been seated to Sir Alistair's right at the table. Julian Marsh, the estate's long-time secretary, whose devotion to his employer had been widely known. And a carefully curated circle of social acquaintances, each prominent, each respectable. Each of them, without exception, had been facing Sir Alistair when he collapsed. Each of them had an unobstructed view. Each of them swore there had been no attacker. Inspector Caldwell began his preliminary questioning at once. Did anyone see anything unusual before Sir Alistair fell? Murmurs, shaken heads. No sudden movement? No sound? No stranger present? Nothing. Dr. Levin provided the first concrete detail. There was a wound, he stated gravely, A narrow, penetrating injury, clean, surgical, almost. From what instrument? Caldwell demanded. That, said the doctor carefully, is precisely the question. No knife had been found on or near the body. No blade lay beneath the table. No blood trail marked an escape. It was as though the weapon had appeared from thin air, struck, and vanished. An hour later, Caldwell stood alone on the terrace, replaying the event in his mind. 43 witnesses, broad daylight, open air, the murder everyone saw. And yet, in the most literal sense, no one had seen it at all. At 6:15, as the golden light began to soften over Waverly Court, a motor car approached the gravel drive. From it descended a small, impeccably dressed man with an egg-shaped head and the most symmetrical moustache in Europe. He paused before the entrance, brushed an imaginary speck from his sleeve, and surveyed the estate with keen, intelligent eyes. "Hastings," he murmured softly to his companion, "when a crime occurs in perfect order, it is rarely the work of chaos." Captain Arthur Hastings blinked. Perfect order? My dear Poirot, the man was stabbed in front of half of London. "Mais oui," said Hercule Poirot gently. And that is precisely what troubles me." Inspector Caldwell met them at the door, relief flickering briefly across his stern features. "Mr. Poirot," he said stiffly, "I trust you received my message." "I did, Inspector. A most intriguing affair you describe." "Intriguing is one word for it." Poirot removed his gloves with deliberate care. "You say," he continued mildly, that 43 people saw Sir Alistair Waverly at the moment of his death." "That is correct." "And yet none saw the hand that killed him." "Exactly." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then," he said softly, "we must consider the possibility that the hand was not meant to be seen." Hastings frowned. "Surely you don't suggest—" Poirot raised one elegant finger. "My friend, in cases such as these it is not what is hidden that matters most." He turned his gaze toward the terrace, now eerily calm in the fading sunlight. "It is what is displayed." He stepped outside, walking slowly to the precise spot where Sir Alistair had stood. The tables had not yet been disturbed. The chair lay on its side. A faint stain darkened the stone. Poirot did not examine the wound. He did not search for footprints. Instead, he turned in a slow circle. He observed the distance between chairs, the angles of sight, the position of the sun, and the expressions remembered in the faces of those who had watched. 43 witnesses, all facing forward, all expecting a toast, all focused upon a single man. "Yes," Poirot murmured to himself, "it was very clever." Inspector Caldwell stiffened. "You see something?" "I see," said Poirot quietly, "that this was not merely a murder." He adjusted his moustache with delicate precision. It was a performance. Inside, in the blue drawing-room, the suspects waited. Some whispered. Some stared at the carpet. Some calculated. None yet realized that Hercule Poirot had already noticed the first imperfection in their perfectly staged tragedy. And he smiled ever so faintly. "For when everyone sees the same thing," he said softly to Hastings, "it is because they have been arranged to see it." He folded his hands behind his back. "Come, mon ami, let us meet our audience." The drawing-room seemed smaller now than it had an hour before. The tall windows admitted the last pale wash of daylight, but the brilliance of the fete had drained away, leaving only strained faces and the faint scent of crushed flowers clinging to silk and linen. Poirot paused just inside the threshold, allowing the silence to acknowledge him. He bowed slightly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said in his gentle, precise voice, I regret profoundly that we meet under such tragic circumstances. Yet since it appears that fate has made you all witnesses to a most extraordinary event, we must, together, seek the truth of it." Inspector Caldwell remained near the mantel, arms folded. "Mr. Poirot will assist in clarifying certain inconsistencies," he announced bluntly. A flicker, too quick to name, passed through several pairs of eyes. Poirot noticed. "Let us begin," he continued pleasantly, "with a simple matter. You were all facing Sir Alistair when he rose to speak." "Oh, yeah?" A murmur of assent moved through the room. "No one," Poirot went on, "was behind him." "No," said Dr. Levin firmly. "The balustrade was directly at his back. Beyond it, only the gardens." "And no one," Poirot added, "observed any person approach within arm's reach?" Again, unanimous agreement. Poirot inclined his head. "Excellent. Then we are in harmony." Hastings, standing discreetly at his side, shifted. He knew that tone. It meant Poirot was far from satisfied. Lady Evelyn," Poirot said gently, turning to the widow, "you were seated to your husband's left." She nodded, her composure admirable but fragile. "Yes, I remember his glass catching the light. It seemed festive." "Did he appear unwell before he stood?" "No, perfectly himself." "Agitated? Distracted?" A faint hesitation. "He had been preoccupied all week. Matters of business." Benedict Harrow's gaze sharpened at this. Poirot's eyes slid toward him at once. "Ah, Monsieur Harrow."
You shared in these business matters?" "We were partners," Harrow replied evenly. "Naturally there were discussions. Nothing that would cause murder." "Nevertheless," Poirot said mildly, "there were disagreements?" "Sir Alistair was cautious. I am progressive. We debated an expansion abroad." "An expansion requiring considerable capital." Harrow's jaw tightened.
Yes." "And Sir Alistair opposed it?" He hesitated. "While you supported it strongly?" "I believed it necessary." Poirot nodded as though discussing the weather. "Thank you. We shall return to that." He turned next to Clara Waverly. "Mademoiselle, you are your uncle's nearest relation?" "Yes." "And beneficiary?" Her chin lifted. "If you mean to imply—" I imply nothing," Poirot interrupted gently. "I seek clarity. You inherit?" "Yes." "Did your uncle approve of your recent engagement?" A flush rose to her cheeks. "He disapproved of Julian," she said quietly. Every head turned toward the secretary. Julian Marsh sat rigidly upright, his hands folded too neatly. "Sir Alistair valued prudence," he said. "He feared I could not provide Clara with sufficient security." "And could you?" Poirot asked softly. Marsh met his gaze.
I've served him faithfully for 12 years. "That is not the same answer." A faint tremor crossed Marsh's mouth. "No, it is not." Poirot let the silence expand, then shifted his attention to Dr. Levin. "Doctor, you described the wound as narrow, surgical." "Yes." "A stiletto?" "Possibly, or a fine-bladed instrument." "Would such a weapon be easily concealed? In a sleeve, perhaps?" "Yet no one stood near enough to use it," Poirot reminded him. "No." Poirot's head tilted slightly.
"And the force required?" "Minimal, if placed precisely between the ribs." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "Precisely." Inspector Caldwell cleared his throat. "Are you suggesting one of them lunged forward unseen? That's absurd. 40 people watching." "Just so," Poirot agreed. He crossed to the window and glanced toward the terrace below. The tables remained untouched, the geometry of the scene intact. When Sir Alistair rose, Poirot said without turning. All eyes lifted to him.
"Ah, yes?" "Yes," Lady Evelyn whispered. "His right hand held the glass. His left rested upon the table." "I believe so," said Harrow, and he spoke for perhaps 3 seconds before faltering. "2 or 3, Dr. Living confirmed. Poirot turned back slowly. In that moment, did anyone observe his expression before he fell? Clara spoke first. He looked surprised. Not afraid? No. Not in pain? She hesitated. Only puzzled. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Puzzled," he repeated.
But he moved toward the centre of the room. "Permit me to ask something that may seem foolish. When Sir Alistair collapsed, did he fall forward or backward?" "Forward," several voices answered at once. "Upon the table." "Yes." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Inspector, was the wound in the chest angled downward or upward?" Caldwell frowned. "Downward."
Slightly. "And the blood pattern?" "Mostly on the waistcoat and tablecloth." "No arterial spray?" "None that I saw." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Then we face a charming paradox," he murmured. Hastings blinked. "Charming? Indeed, a man is stabbed in full view, yet he does not cry out. He does not clutch at an attacker. He appears puzzled." He paced once across the carpet. "And the weapon vanishes." Caldwell's patience thinned. "You've implied this was staged. By whom?"
"Sir, they were all seated." "Ah," said Poirot. "Seated." He turned abruptly to Julian Marsh. "Monsieur, during the toast were you seated?" "Yes." "Both feet upon the ground?" Marsh's eyes flickered. "Naturally." "Did you rise at any moment?" "No." "And you, Monsieur Harrow?" "I remained seated." "Doctor?" "Seated." Poirot inclined his head. "And no one," he repeated softly, "stood." He let the word hang in the air like an accusation. Hastings shifted uneasily. "Poirot, but surely someone would have noticed if a person rose from their chair." "Precisely, my friend." He faced the assembled guests once more. "You were all watching Sir Alistair, all expecting his words, all united in attention." He gestured lightly with one hand. "Tell me, did any of you glance away, even for an instant?" A pause. Lady Evelyn spoke uncertainly. "I may have adjusted my napkin." Clara frowned. "I looked at the champagne bottle when he began speaking." Harrow added,
I recall someone dropping a fork at the far end." Inspector Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "No one mentioned that." "It was insignificant," Harrow said quickly. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A dropped fork is never insignificant, monsieur. Who dropped it?" A ripple of uncertainty passed through the group. Finally, a young socialite near the end of the row raised a trembling hand. I believe it was I." "And at what moment?" "Just as Sir Alistair said friendship, I think." Poirot nodded slowly. So there was a sound, a small distraction. "It was nothing," Caldwell insisted. "Nothing," Poirot echoed thoughtfully. He moved again toward the window, his mind visibly arranging unseen pieces. A fork falls, a momentary diversion. Several heads turn. Sir Alistair appears puzzled. He collapses forward, a precise wound, no cry. He closed his eyes briefly. "When a magician performs," he said quietly, "he does not hide the object. He directs the gaze elsewhere." Caldwell exhaled sharply. "So are you suggesting misdirection?" "I suggest," Poirot replied, opening his eyes, "that every one of you saw exactly what you were meant to see." The room seemed to tighten around them. Clara's voice wavered. "You think one of us—" "I think," said Poirot gently, "that the truth stands among us. Calm, observant, certain that 43 witnesses are the perfect shield." He straightened his cuffs. But a shield may crack, mes amis, especially when it is too perfect. Outside.
A twilight settled over Waverly Court, softening the rigid lines of the terrace where the impossible had occurred. Inside, the first fracture had appeared, not in stone or steel, but in certainty. And Poirot, watching the subtle tremors in posture and breath, knew that someone in that room had just realized the performance was not yet complete. Inspector Caldwell broke the silence first. "If you're implying that the fork was deliberate, Mr. Poirot—"
Then you are suggesting conspiracy." Poirot did not answer at once. His gaze drifted across the assembled faces, noting who met his eyes and who avoided them. Julian Marsh had grown very still. Benedict Harrow's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair before he stilled them. Clara Waverly's lips parted slightly as though a thought had brushed her mind and vanished again. "Not necessarily conspiracy," Poirot said at last. "But design, yes."
Design interests me very much." He turned to the young woman who had admitted dropping the fork. "Mademoiselle, you must forgive me. I did not catch your name." "Penelope Ashcroft. You were seated at the far end of the table?" "Yes." "Opposite Sir Alistair?" "Not directly opposite, slightly the right." "And when you dropped the fork, you bent to retrieve it?" "Yes, of course." "Did anyone assist you?" She hesitated. "I believe Mr. Marsh did." All eyes shifted once more to the secretary. Julian Marsh inclined his head stiffly. "The fork fell near my chair. I picked it up and handed it back." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "So you rose." Marsh's expression sharpened. "I half rose. It required scarcely a second." "A second," Poirot repeated. "And during that second the attention of some guests was drawn away." "It was a trivial courtesy," Marsh replied, but there was a faint dryness to his tone. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back once more. "Inspector, how may we reconstruct?" Caldwell frowned but nodded. "If it will end this speculation." They returned to the terrace, several of the principal guests following under quiet instruction. The evening air had cooled. Servants had lit the lanterns along the balustrade, casting long, soft shadows across the stone. The tables remained as they had been, undisturbed. Poirot moved with precise deliberation, indicating positions. "Lady Evelyn, here. Monsieur Harrow, to her right. Doctor, to her left. Eddie Mademoiselle Clara, opposite. Monsieur Marsh, slightly beyond." They complied uneasily. "Now," Poirot continued, "let us imagine the moment Sir Alistair rises." Hastings, persuaded to stand in for the deceased, lifted an imaginary glass. "All eyes," Poirot said quietly, "are upon him." He stepped aside and nodded to Penelope Ashcroft. "You drop your fork." She released a utensil to the table. It clattered convincingly onto the stone. The small and metallic sound seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. Instinctively, several heads turned. "Observe," Poirot murmured. Julian Marsh, as before, half rose and bent slightly to retrieve the fallen fork. In that instant, the arrangement shifted. A chair scraped, a shoulder angled forward. For a heartbeat, Sir Alistair, represented by Hastings, stood not as the sole focal point, but one of several moving elements. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Again," he said. They repeated it. This time, Poirot changed position, standing where Dr. Levar had been seated. The fork fell. Marsh rose, and for a fraction of a second, Hastings's torso was partially obscured by the movement of Marsh's arm. Poirot held up a hand. "Enough!" Inspector Caldwell folded his arms. "You're suggesting the secretary struck him while returning to his seat?" No, said Poirot calmly. That would require proximity beyond what we observe. The distance remains too great. Then what? Poirot did not answer. He crouched instead, examining the exact position where Sir Alistair had stood. Inspector, he said without looking up. The wound was slightly downward in angle. Yes. And Sir Alistair fell forward. Yes. Then the force came from before him or from above. There was nothing above him? Precisely. Poirot rose slowly. His gaze drifted to the champagne bottle at the centre of the table. Doctor, he asked lightly, before the toast, had Sir Alistair consumed any wine? A single glass? And you observed nothing unusual in his manner? Nothing. Poirot considered this. When he appeared puzzled, did he raise his hand to his chest? Clara shook her head. No, he simply faltered. As though interrupted, Poirot murmured. Inspector Caldwell exhaled in irritation. A blade doesn't interrupt a man. It pierces him. Unless, Poirot said softly. The blade was already there. A ripple of disbelief passed through the group.
Already there? Caldwell demanded. Poirot turned his gaze upon the table setting. Sir Alistair rose, he said slowly. He placed weight upon his hands, perhaps lightly against the table. He lifted his glass. He spoke. He stepped closer to the edge where the victim had stood. What if, he continued, the instrument was fixed, not wielded? Silence answered him. Hastings stared. You mean, attached to the table? Possibly. Inspector Caldwell bent abruptly.
I'm examining the underside of the tablecloth. There's nothing here. Now, Poirot agreed. Caldwell straightened. You think someone affixed a blade and then removed it afterward, with 40 witnesses? Poirot's expression remained mild. The weapon has vanished, therefore it was either small enough to conceal instantly, or it was never visible to begin with. Dr. Levien frowned. But the wound was clean, deliberate. Just so. Poirot circled the table once more, and then stopped abruptly at the precise spot where Sir Alistair's chair had stood. He knelt again, this time studying the stone beneath. What are you looking for? Hastings asked. Absence, Poirot replied. He brushed his gloved fingers lightly across the terrace surface. Inspector, was there much blood upon the ground? Less than expected. Indeed. Poirot rose very slowly. If a blade had been thrust from a distance, there would be momentum, resistance, a cry. But there was none. He looked at each of them in turn. Sir Alistair did not defend himself. He did not recoil. He appeared puzzled. Lady Evelyn's breath caught faintly. You think he knew? She whispered. I think, Poirot said gently, that he felt something unexpected but not immediately understood. Benedict Harrow's voice cut in sharply. This is absurd speculation. Are you implying some mechanical contrivance? A spring-loaded dagger? Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. And you are acquainted with such devices, monsieur? Harrow stiffened. Of course not. Then your imagination is lively. Harrow said nothing further. The lantern light flickered faintly in the growing dark. Poirot stepped back from the table and turned toward the balustrade. Beyond it, the gardens sloped in precise symmetry. Inspector, he said quietly, who had access to this terrace before the fete? Servants, caterers, the household staff, and Monsieur Marsh? He oversees arrangements, Caldwell admitted. Julian Marsh's face had paled slightly. I supervised placements, yes, that is my duty. Of course, Poirot agreed. He walked slowly toward Marsh. You are devoted to Sir Alistair. I was. And yet he opposed your engagement. That was his right. Did you resent it? Marsh's jaw tightened. I respected him. Respect and resentment, Poirot murmured, are sometimes intimate companions. Clara took an involuntary step forward. Julian would never. Poirot raised a calming hand. I accuse no one. He turned back toward the table once more, his mind visibly turning over unseen mechanisms. There is something, he said softly, almost to himself. Something arranged in plain sight. Inspector Caldwell followed his gaze. If there was a device, it is gone now. Oui? Said Poirot. He removed in the confusion. By whom? Poirot looked up at the assembled circle. By the only person who did not need to move at all. A hush fell over them. Hastings stared. But everyone remained seated except Marsh. Exactly, Poirot replied. The words seemed to settle heavily in the cooling air. Marsh drew himself upright. You said yourself I was too far. For a blade, perhaps, Poirot said evenly. But not for something else. Caldwell stepped forward. You'd better explain that, mister.
Ah, Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Not yet, Inspector, he said softly. The picture forms, but one detail eludes me. He glanced once more at the champagne bottle, the glasses, the exact spacing of chairs. Then he smiled very slightly. But when it reveals itself, he added, it will be beautifully simple. And in the uneasy stillness that followed, someone among them understood that simplicity, in this case, would be devastating.
Poirot's last words hung in the lantern-lit air, and for a moment no one seemed willing to disturb them. Inspector Caldwell cleared his throat, impatient with mystery for its own sake, and gestured toward the house. We'll continue inside, he said. It's getting cold, and I want statements while memories are fresh. They moved back through the French doors. Servants hovered along the hall like pale ghosts, their faces pinched with fear and curiosity. Poirot paused just long enough to note them, who lingered closest to the terrace, who kept their eyes down, then followed Caldwell into Sir Alistair's study. It was a room that proclaimed a man's love of order, shelves aligned by height, papers squared, the inkstand centered. Yet on the blotter lay a single sheet at a slight angle, as though someone had set it down in haste and not corrected it. Poirot's eyes went to it at once, but he did not touch it. Caldwell took the desk as if claiming territory. Lady Evelyn, he said, start with the afternoon. Anything out of place? Lady Evelyn sat stiffly opposite him. Her voice was controlled, but each word sounded measured. She spoke of the guest list, the terrace arrangements, her husband's insistence that the fete proceed despite fatigue. When Caldwell asked if Sir Alistair had been afraid, a flicker crossed her face. He received letters, she said at last. Anonymous.
Unpleasant ones. Threats, Caldwell snapped. Poirot's tone was gentle. Or accusations, madame? Accusations. About money. About what he owed. He called it blackmail. Benedict Harrow, seated near the fire, gave a short laugh. Blackmail is rarely laughed away. Poirot's eyes slid to him. You knew of these letters, monsieur. I knew he'd been preoccupied, Harrow replied. He refused details. And you? Poirot asked softly. Refused details also. Harrow's jaw tightened.
I refuse nonsense. Caldwell dismissed Lady Evelyn and called Clara Waverly. Clara's back was straight, her hands clenched in her lap. She admitted her uncle had grown colder toward her, disapproving of her engagement to Julian Marsh. He said love was leverage, she whispered. That kindness always had a price. Poirot watched her carefully. And did you believe him? Clara's eyes flicked toward the door, as if imagining someone listening. I did not want to, she said. And when Julian Marsh entered, he wore composure like armour. He answered briskly. He had overseen seating cards, checked the caterer's staff list, ensured the terrace was set as Sir Alistair preferred. Yes, he had retrieved Miss Ashcroft's fork. No, he had not approached the body once Dr. Levin knelt beside it. Poirot's gaze, however, stayed on Marsh's hands. There was a small nick near the cuticle of his right thumb, poorly concealed. Marsh followed Poirot's eyes and tucked his hand into his pocket a fraction too quickly. Caldwell questioned Harrow last. The businessman refused the chair, remaining standing. "If you think I murdered a partner in front of 40 witnesses," he said, "Inspector, you've mistaken me for a melodramatic fool." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "melodrama is often only misdirection with louder music." Harrow's stare was flat. "What do you know of misdirection, Mr. Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly. "And just enough to distrust what is obvious." Caldwell ended the interviews with curt instructions. No one would leave the house, servants would be questioned, the grounds searched again at dawn. The body would be removed to the mortuary as soon as arrangements could be made. As the others filed out, Hastings found Poirot lingering by the desk, his eyes fixed on the skewed sheet of paper. "You mean to read that?" Hastings whispered. "Not yet," Poirot replied. "Will be a thing read too soon becomes merely information. A thing read at the right moment becomes understanding." Hastings frowned. "But if it's a clue—" Poirot raised a hand. "First, we confirm what everyone assumes." He moved to the window. Outside, the terrace lanterns made small pools of light. Beyond them, the gardens dissolved into darkness. "A murderer who wishes to be unseen does not rely only on speed," Poirot said softly.
He relies on certainty, on what people believe cannot happen." A knock came at the door. The butler, pale and flustered, stepped in. "Beg pardon, sir, Inspector. There's been a disturbance in the conservatory." Caldwell's head snapped up. "What now?" "It's Miss Ashcroft," the butler said. "She's in a fright. Says she's found something." Poirot's eyes brightened, though his voice remained mild. "Something that was not there before, perhaps." The butler swallowed.
"Oh, and she says it was hidden in the soil of the potted palms." They crossed the hall and entered the conservatory, where the air was warm and thick with wet earth and jasmine. Penelope Ashcroft stood by a terracotta pot, trembling, her gloves smeared with dirt. "I dropped my bracelet," she stammered. "When I reached down, this was there." On the tile floor, wrapped in a handkerchief, lay a slender, gleaming blade no longer than a finger, its point darkened with drying blood. For a heartbeat, and no one breathed, Caldwell swore and lifted it with his own handkerchief. At last, a weapon. Poirot did not look at the blade first. He looked at the careful wrapping, at the disturbed soil, at Penelope's shaking hands and the darting glance she gave toward the hall as though half expecting someone to appear and snatch it back. "Yes," Poirot murmured. "At last." Then, so softly only Hastings heard, he added, "And now, the game changes." Inspector Caldwell held the thin blade as though it might leap from his fingers. In the warm air of the conservatory it looked almost delicate, yet the dark smear along its tip spoke plainly. "Where exactly?" Caldwell demanded. "In the pot," Penelope Ashcroft whispered. "I thought my bracelet had slipped. I reached into the soil and felt the cloth." "You didn't put it there?" "No, why should I?"
"I only dropped a fork." That is all anyone will remember. Poirot's eyes rested on her. Or perhaps it is precisely what someone wishes to be remembered. Caldwell turned on him. You think she's lying? I think she is frightened, Poirot replied. And fear is a compass, if one knows what it points to. He bent to study the terracotta pot. The soil was disturbed in a neat crescent, as though a careful hand had smoothed it after hiding the packet. Not hurriedly, deliberately.
"And who had access to this room after the murder?" Caldwell snapped at the butler. "Anyone, sir," the man admitted. "Ladies came to wash their hands, gentlemen to smoke. There was confusion." "Lock the doors," Caldwell ordered, and strode out for a constable, already tasting victory. Hastings watched him go. "Well, Poirot, surely this helps." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "It helps the inspector very much." "And you?" "It helps me differently." When Caldwell returned with an evidence envelope, Poirot did not study the blade first. He studied the handkerchief wrapped around it, fine linen with a single initial, J.M., stitched neatly in one corner. Hastings drew a sharp breath. "Julian Marsh!" Penelope gave a small, choked sound. Caldwell's mouth tightened in satisfaction. "So our devoted secretary forgets his monogram. Convenient." Poirot's voice remained mild. "Convenient, yes." "My friend," he added to Hastings, "when a clue is too convenient, it is often not a clue, but a gift."
And gifts in murder cases are rarely given without a string. Poirot turned to Penelope. "You came here alone?" She hesitated. "I think so." "You think so?" "Someone brushed past me earlier," she whispered. "A servant, I assumed. I did not look up." Poirot nodded, as though confirming an expectation. "Thank you." Caldwell reappeared in the doorway. "Bring Marsh here," he ordered. Julian Marsh arrived within minutes, pale but controlled. His eyes went first to Clara Waverly in the hall,
and then to the envelope in Caldwell's hand. For an instant his composure cracked, more surprise than guilt, and then hardened. "What is this?" he asked. "Your knife," Caldwell said. "Found in a palm, wrapped in your handkerchief." Marsh's gaze fixed on the embroidered corner. "That handkerchief is mine," he said slowly, "but I have not seen it since this afternoon." "And the knife?" "I have never owned a knife like that." Dr. Levin stepped forward. "A stiletto. Narrow, or precise, exactly as I described." "A description does not make it mine," Marsh replied. Caldwell leaned in. "You rose when the fork dropped. You had motive, disapproval, inheritance, jealousy, and now we have your cloth. Stop playing the saint." Clara's voice broke. "Julian, tell him." Marsh did not look at her. "Someone is framing me," he said, and the flat certainty chilled the room. Poirot spoke gently. "Monsieur Marsh, where were you when Sir Alistair fell?" "Beside my chair." "And after?" "I assisted Lady Evelyn. I spoke to the inspector. I arranged for water." "And you did not enter this conservatory?" "No." Poirot inclined his head. "Inspector, may I see the blade?" Caldwell hesitated, then opened the envelope. Poirot leaned close. The blade ended not in a handle, but in a small flat tang drilled with two tiny holes. "A blade meant to be fixed," Poirot murmured. "Not held." Caldwell blinked.
"What are you saying?" "That this is not a gentleman's weapon," Poirot replied. "It is a component." Hastings stared. "A component of what?" Poirot glanced toward the terrace doors, beyond which lanterns still burned. "Of the performance," he said, quietly. "Props, preparation, and, above all, timing." Marsh seized on it. You see, it isn't mine." "Do not rejoice too quickly," Poirot said. "To be framed, one must still be useful to the frame." Caldwell's patience snapped. "Enough! Marsh!"
You're coming with us." Two constables took Marsh by the arms. He allowed it, but his eyes went to Clara at last. "I did not do this," he said, and it sounded less like pleading than warning. Clara swayed, catching herself on the doorframe. As Marsh was led away, Poirot stepped to the pot again and pressed a finger into the soil. Beneath the smoothed surface he felt a colder dampness than the rest. Someone had watered the plant after hiding the knife to settle the earth, to erase the outline.
"Oh, Inspector," Poirot called softly. Caldwell turned, impatient. "When you search," Poirot said, "do not search only for the man who could stab. Search for the one who could arrange." Caldwell snorted. "With a weapon and initials, I'll take what I have." Poirot bowed politely. "As you wish." But when Caldwell left, Poirot remained, gazing at the palms, at the wet soil, at the heavy perfume. Somewhere in the house a clock began to strike, each note a measured step.
From the corridor came the faint creak of a board, then silence again. Poirot did not turn, he merely smiled, because someone, somewhere, was checking whether their bait had taken. And Poirot, listening, felt the string tighten on the gift that had been so neatly placed. Poirot did not leave the conservatory at once. He walked slowly along the glass walls, letting the damp warmth settle upon him, and watched the night press its face against the panes. Outside, the terrace lanterns made wavering circles on the stone. Inside, the palms stood like silent witnesses, their broad leaves trembling whenever a door sighed in the corridor. Hastings hovered, restless. "Surely, Poirot, with Marsh arrested—" "Arrested," Poirot echoed, "is not the same as guilty. It is merely convenient. And I dislike convenience when it arrives wrapped in monograms." He stopped before a low bench where gardening tools lay neatly arranged, trowel, shears, twine. If nothing was out of place, that, in itself, was an alarm. "You think the handkerchief was planted?" Hastings said. "I think it was selected," Poirot corrected. "The initials are not evidence, they are theatre, and theatre requires an audience that will applaud at the right moment." A maid appeared at the conservatory door, breathless. "Mr. Poirot, sir, Lady Evelyn asks if you will come. She says there is something in Sir Alistair's study you ought to see before the police take everything." Poirot bowed. "We come at once." In the study, the lamps were lit, throwing a glow upon the orderly shelves. Lady Evelyn stood beside the desk as though it were an altar she feared to touch. Her eyes were red but clear. "I did not mention it earlier," she said quietly, "because Inspector Caldwell frightened me with his certainty. But you look as though certainty frightens you too." Poirot's expression softened. "Certainty, madame, is the mask of ignorance." She pointed to the skewed sheet on the blotter. "That paper was not there this morning. I keep his desk perfectly arranged. Sir Alistair insisted upon it." Poirot approached and lifted the sheet by two corners. It was a typed letter, unsigned, the ink sharp and black. "Pay by Friday, or the world will see you as you are." Below the words was a small square of glossy paper, a photograph, slightly blurred. It showed Sir Alistair on the terrace, standing near the balustrade, alone, though the angle suggested another figure just beyond the frame. Hastings leaned in. Blackmail indeed. Poirot studied the photograph longer than the letter. The terrace stones, the pattern of the balustrade, the curve of sunlight. Then his eyes slid to the edge where the second figure should have been, and he noticed the faintest sliver of white, like a cuff cut off by the crop. "Madame?" Poirot asked gently. "Did your husband keep enemies among his friends?" Lady Evelyn's mouth tightened. "He kept secrets," she said, "and he believed secrets could be managed like accounts." "Did he intend to pay?" "I do not know. He would not discuss it. He only said that Friday would settle the matter." Poirot placed the letter back precisely as he had found it. "Friday," he murmured. A deadline is a drumbeat. One times, one steps to it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Levin entered, looking disturbed. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, Inspector Caldwell has sent for me. He wishes me to examine Mr. Marsh's hands for traces of blood." "And what do you think?" Poirot asked. Levin hesitated. "There is a tiny cut on his thumb. It could be from anything." Poirot nodded. "And yet it will become, in the inspector's mind, the whole case." Levin swallowed. I came because there is something else. Sir Alistair asked to see me privately yesterday. He spoke of a heart complaint. Nothing severe, but he said he felt a pressure lately, as though someone was sitting upon his chest." "Did you prescribe anything?" Hastings asked. "A tonic and rest." Poirot's eyes sharpened. He feared illness. "He feared," Levin corrected softly, "that someone wished him to appear ill, while he asked me whether certain substances could mimic cardiac distress without leaving obvious traces." Lady Evelyn went very still. "I told him yes," Levin said, "but I urged him to involve the police. He refused. He said the police would see only what was placed in front of them." Poirot smiled faintly. "A man who understands the police is already a step closer to being murdered." After Levin left, Lady Evelyn sank into a chair. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew something was coming." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "But he did not know how it would be done. That is why his face showed puzzlement." Hastings frowned. "Then the blade—" "May have been only the second act," Poirot said. He walked to the window and looked out. A shadow crossed the lit path near the terrace, low, like someone moving cautiously between pools of light. Poirot's gaze followed it. Our murderer is not content with one illusion. He arranges evidence, arrests his scapegoat,
and then he watches to see if the net closes. "And if it does not?" Hastings asked. Poirot turned, his eyes bright. "Then he will tighten it himself." At that moment, a sharp cry rang from upstairs, high, startled, then cut short. Footsteps pounded in the corridor, voices rising. Lady Evelyn clutched the arms of her chair. Poirot was already moving, quick despite dignity. He flung open the study door and met a servant racing past, ashen. "It's Miss Clara," the girl gasped. She's in the East Gallery. She's fallen, and there's blood." Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened. "Voilà," he said softly. "The performance continues, for all of us." Poirot reached the East Gallery as the household converged upon it, a knot of frightened faces under the dim glow of wall sconces. The corridor ran the length of the upper floor, lined with portraits whose painted eyes now seemed to watch with disapproval. At the far end, Clara Waverly lay on her side near a pedestal table that had been overturned, its porcelain vase shattered into white shards on the rug. Dr. Levin was already kneeling beside her, fingers at her throat. "Alive," he said sharply. A thin ribbon of blood traced from her hairline to her temple. Lady Evelyn arrived behind Poirot with a strangled gasp. "Clara!" "Madame, breathe," Poirot said, steadying her. "Doctor, what happened?" Levin's brow furrowed. "A blow to the head, not deep, And she is stunned. Inspector Caldwell pushed through the servants with 2 constables. Clear the hall, he barked, then saw Clara and swore. Who found her? The maid who had run earlier wrung her hands. I heard her cry. I came and she was already down. Did you see anyone leave? No, sir. I only heard footsteps running toward the stair. The servants' stair? Caldwell snapped. I think so. Caldwell pointed at a footman. Go down and guard it.
No one passes. Poirot crouched beside the fallen table. Its legs were heavy, yet the angle of its fall suggested it had been shoved. He noted, too, a faint smear of wet earth near Clara's shoulder, almost invisible in the rug's pattern. From the conservatory, Hastings murmured. Or from a shoe that visited the conservatory, Poirot corrected. Levin produced smelling salts. Clara stirred and opened her eyes. She looked wildly from face to face. Julian, she whispered.
So they've taken him. Yes, Caldwell said briskly. And now someone adds assault to his list. Who attacked you, Miss Waverly? Clara fixed him with sudden clarity. It wasn't Julian. I didn't see his face, she said quickly, struggling to sit. But I heard a voice, low. He said, If you speak, you will follow him. Then something struck me. I fell, and the table came down beside me. Poirot leaned closer. Did you notice anything else, mademoiselle? A smell like flowers.
But bitter. Jasmine? Poirot asked. Clara nodded faintly. Poirot glanced along the corridor. The nearest open door led into a small sitting room where jasmine pots climbed trellises, their perfume drifting strongly into the gallery. Caldwell seized on it. Someone from this floor, someone who knows the house, Poirot said quietly, or someone who wished to suggest that. Caldwell ignored him and turned to the servants. Search every room. No one leaves. Poirot touched Hastings's sleeve. Come. They moved toward the shadowed junction by the servants' stair. On the polished wood, a faint scuff marked a hurried turn. Poirot knelt and ran a fingertip along it, dust mixed with dampness. Wet, Hastings said. Yes, and soil, Poirot replied. Our visitor went from palms to portraits very quickly. Hastings frowned. But why attack Clara? If Marsh is the scapegoat, her defending him is inconvenient. Exactly, Poirot said. Someone must silence her and also suggest that Marsh, or desperate, has struck again. The police love a straight line. A constable hurried up. Inspector, Mr. Marsh is demanding to see Miss Waverly. Caldwell's voice rose. He'll speak when I say. Poirot approached Caldwell, courteous but firm. Permit it. Under guard. Observe how a man behaves when his beloved lies bleeding and he is accused. Caldwell hesitated, then jerked his head. Bring him. 2 constables. Minutes later, Julian Marsh was marched into the gallery, flanked. But the moment he saw Clara, his control faltered. He stepped forward, then stopped himself. Clara, he said hoarsely, are you hurt? Someone attacked me, she whispered. Marsh's eyes flicked to the overturned table and the smear on the rug. Then, very briefly, they went to Poirot. He's trying to make it look like me, Marsh said. Caldwell snorted. Everything looks like you. Marsh ignored him. Clara, listen. There was something on your uncle's desk, papers he kept locked. He told me yesterday, if anything happens, look in the false bottom. I meant to, but they took me before I could. Poirot's mind clicked. A false bottom, he murmured. Caldwell's eyes sharpened. What are you talking about? You will see, Poirot said calmly, if you permit me to open the desk properly without ruining the order. Caldwell opened his mouth to protest, then his gaze snagged on Marsh's sleeve. The scent of jasmine clung faintly there. Caldwell's face changed.
Aye, so you've been in the sitting room. Marsh stiffened. I was dragged past it. Poirot's eyes remained on the sleeve. Jasmine could be carried by air, by brush, by design. And design, he thought, was tightening like a noose. He spoke before Caldwell could turn suspicion into certainty. Inspector, the jasmine proves nothing. On this floor, it is everywhere, and someone who wishes to accuse can brush any sleeve as he passes. He nodded to Dr. Levin.
Take Mademoiselle Clara to her room and keep her awake an hour. Ask her gently if the voice used any peculiar phrase. Then he faced Caldwell. Come with me to the study. If there is a false bottom, we open it now, this very moment, before another helpful hand removes what it contains. Caldwell hesitated, but the smear of soil, the planted knife, and the fresh assault had shaken even him. He motioned, curtly, "Or lead on." Poirot returned to the study with Inspector Caldwell at his shoulder and Hastings close behind. The house seemed to hold its breath. Even the servants' footsteps had softened. Caldwell shut the door with a decisive click, then planted himself by the desk, like a guard before a vault. "False bottom," he said. "Show me." Poirot did not immediately touch anything. He stood for a moment, eyes travelling over the immaculate surface, the centred inkstand, the squared stack of correspondence, the single, skewed blackmail note. Then he nodded once, as though saluting Sir Alistair's devotion to symmetry. "Captain Hastings," he said quietly, "will you observe and remember we must replace each object exactly. Disorder is a confession in this room." Caldwell snorted. "We're not here to admire furniture." "No," Poirot agreed. "We are here to admire method." He opened the right-hand drawer with 2 fingers. Inside lay a row of neatly sharpened pencils, a ruler, blotting paper, and a small brass key. Poirot lifted the key, held it up for Caldwell to see, and then, instead of trying the desk lock, slid it beneath the blotter. Hastings blinked. "Why there?" "Because Sir Alistair wished it near his hand, but not visible," Poirot said. "And because a man who hides a key in plain sight expects to use it quickly." He pressed the blotter at one corner. It shifted with the faintest resistance. Beneath it, a concealed seam revealed itself. Poirot inserted the key into a narrow slot and turned. A soft click answered him. Caldwell leaned forward. "You're telling me that was here all along?" "Oui," Poirot murmured, "and someone in this house knew it." A panel slid back, revealing a shallow compartment lined with velvet. Inside lay 3 items, a small leather notebook, a folded telegram, and a second photograph, this one clearer than the first. Poirot lifted the photograph and passed it to Caldwell without a word. Your Caldwell studied it, his face tightening. It showed Sir Alistair in a dim doorway, handing an envelope to a man whose profile was unmistakable, despite the shadow. Benedict Harrow. Hastings drew in his breath. Harrow was the blackmailer? "Or the payer," Poirot said. "The photograph alone does not tell us which, but it tells us Sir Alistair was not alone in his secrets." Caldwell's voice sharpened. "And it gives me motive. Harrow kills to stop exposure." Poirot's eyes flicked to the telegram, and he unfolded it carefully. The message was short, stamped with London markings. "Meeting confirmed, Terrace, 4:30. Bring ledger, do not involve police." Poirot's gaze held for a fraction longer on the time. 4:30, the exact moment of the toast. "He intended to confront someone," Hastings whispered. "He intended to end something," Poirot corrected. "Blackmail, perhaps, or partnership, or both." Caldwell snatched the leather notebook and flipped it open. columns of figures, dates, keyed initials, tight, meticulous, and damning in their very order. Caldwell's eyes widened as he skimmed. "Payments," he muttered. "Off-book transfers, names coded. This is fraud." Poirot watched Caldwell's finger pause on a page where the code broke and a name appeared in full. Julian Marsh. Beside it, in Sir Alistair's hand, a single word: compensation. Hastings' heart sank. "Marsh took money?" Poirot's expression remained unreadable. "Or received it. There is a difference. Compensation can be guilt, but it can also be silence purchased for kindness." Caldwell's jaw worked. So Marsh is in it after all, partnered with Harrow, skimmed funds, and when Waverly threatened to expose them. Poirot interrupted softly. "Inspector, do you notice what is missing?" Caldwell glared. "A confession?" Poirot tapped the notebook lightly. "Emotion. Sir Alistair wrote numbers, not feelings. Yet he arranged a public fête, chose a moment when every face would be turned toward him, and then he intended a meeting at 4:30 on the terrace. Why choose such a theatre if the matter was merely financial? Hastings frowned. To force the blackmailer to meet him openly? Perhaps, Poirot said. Or to ensure witnesses to something else, a declaration, a denunciation, a protection. Caldwell shoved the notebook into an evidence bag. "You can philosophize later. I'm bringing Harrow in." Poirot's voice stayed calm. "Bring him, yes, but do not announce what you have found. Or if our murderer is not Harrow, he will act again when he learns his scapegoat may be replaced." As if summoned by the words, a faint sound reached them through the door. A dull thud, then hurried voices below. Caldwell froze, listening. "What now?" he snapped, wrenching the door open. A footman stood outside, white as chalk. "Inspector, there's been a scream from the library. Lady Evelyn, she says someone tried to take the blackmail letter from the desk. She caught a shadow by the window and then the lamp fell." Poirot and Hastings exchanged a glance. Poirot's eyes gleamed, not with triumph, but with urgency. "Vous voyez," he murmured, "the hand returns to erase what we touch." Caldwell was already striding toward the hall. Poirot followed, but as he crossed the threshold, he paused just long enough to replace the blotter precisely, to slide the brass key back beneath it, and to leave the desk looking, to any casual glance, as orderly as before. Only then did he move on, his mind racing ahead of the footsteps, because now the murderer knew that Poirot had found the hidden compartment and would not wait for morning to mend the crack in the shield. They found the library in disarray, though not the sort of disarray that comes from a frantic search. It was a careful disturbance, a chair angled wrong, a book pulled halfway from its shelf, a lamp on the floor with its shade cracked like a broken shell. Lady Evelyn stood near the hearth, one hand pressed to her throat, the other clutching a folded sheet of paper as if it were a talisman. "He was here," she whispered, "or she. Someone." I heard the desk lid creak. I came in and saw a shadow at the window. When I cried out, the lamp fell. I think it was thrown. Inspector Caldwell strode to the window and flung it open. Night air rushed in, cold and sharp. Below lay the gravel walk and the clipped yew border, silent and empty. "Yeah, no footprints," Caldwell muttered. "Damn!" Poirot did not go to the window. He went to Lady Evelyn's hand. "The paper," he said gently. "What is it you hold?" She unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was the blackmail note from the study, the same typed threat. But now, across its lower margin, a fresh line had been added in ink, hurried and slanted. "You are not as clever as you think." Hastings felt a chill. "That wasn't there before?" "No," Poirot said softly.
It is a message for me." Caldwell snatched the note. "This is obstruction, interfering with evidence. I'll have every window guarded." "And every mind?" Poirot asked mildly. Caldwell glared. "What are you suggesting now?" Poirot stepped to the desk in the library, an old mahogany piece used for correspondence. On it lay a scattering of stationery and envelopes. One envelope was open, empty, its flap torn too cleanly. Poirot touched it with a fingertip. The paper was still slightly warm.
"Oh, but someone took something," Hastings said. "Yes," Poirot replied, "and left something in its place. That is how the murderer thinks. Exchange, substitution, balance, like an accountant who cannot bear a column to fail." Caldwell's head snapped. "Accounts," he muttered, remembering the ledger. He turned toward the door. "Bring Harrow here, now." Within minutes, Benedict Harrow entered, flanked by a constable. He wore his confidence like a tailored coat, but there was a thin brightness in his eyes that Poirot had not seen earlier. He glanced once at Lady Evelyn, then at the broken lamp. "What is this?" Harrow asked. "More theatrics?" Caldwell thrust the photograph toward him. "Recognize that?" Harrow's expression barely shifted. "A photograph can be made to say anything." "And the ledger?" Caldwell snapped. "You paid money off the books, and now someone tries to steal the blackmail letter. Coincidence?" Harrow's gaze flicked to Poirot. "Mr. Poirot is very fond of coincidence," he said lightly. "He uses it as perfume for suspicion." Poirot smiled faintly. "And you, monsieur, use contempt as a shield. It does not always hold." Caldwell slammed the ledger, bagged, onto the desk. "Explain your meetings with Sir Alistair." Harrow's jaw tightened. "We were partners. We met." "At night? In doorways, with envelopes?" Caldwell pressed. Harrow's nostrils flared. "Sir Alistair had private arrangements. Some were mine to know."
"At others not." Lady Evelyn's voice trembled. "You were blackmailing him?" Harrow turned toward her with a sharpness that betrayed feeling at last. "Do not be melodramatic, Lady Evelyn. Your husband's virtue was always a matter of bookkeeping." Poirot watched that moment keenly. The sudden edge, the loss of polish. A man insulted is not always a man guilty, but he is a man revealed. "Tell me," Poirot said softly, "did Sir Alistair call you to the terrace at 4:30? Harrow's eyes narrowed.
"Who told you that?" Poirot did not answer. Silence answered for him. Harrow recovered quickly. He asked to speak. "Yes, I refused." "And yet you attended his fête." "I could hardly decline a public invitation." Poirot tilted his head. "Public invitations are difficult to refuse. Public deaths, even more so." Caldwell barked. "Where were you when he fell?" "At my seat," Harrow said, "as everyone was." "And after?" "I went to the lavatory." "Which one?" Caldwell snapped. Harrow's lips thinned.
"The one near the conservatory." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah!" Caldwell pounced. "So you could have hidden the blade." "I could also have hidden a cannon," Harrow retorted. "It proves nothing." Poirot stepped closer, voice gentle. "Monsieur Harrow, when a blade is meant to be fixed, not held, it requires preparation, a device, a placement. Someone to conceal it before and someone to remove it after." Harrow's eyes glittered.
"And you think I built a contraption under the table?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that you were capable of arranging many things. Perhaps even another man's ruin." Harrow's mouth curved. "You mean Marsh?" Poirot held his gaze. I mean anyone who profits from a scapegoat." Harrow's composure held, but his fingers flexed once at his side. Caldwell leaned in. "You'll come to London with us in the morning." "In the morning?" Harrow repeated softly, and for the first time there was something like amusement in it. "Inspector, you may not have the morning." A faint sound came then, light, metallic, almost polite. A click, followed by the soft whir of something turning. Poirot's head snapped toward the far side of the library, where the writing table stood beneath a painting. A small clockwork ornament, a silver bird in a glass case, began to flutter its wings with delicate precision. It had not been there earlier. Hastings stared.
That wasn't—" The bird's wings beat faster, its beak opened, and from within the case came a thin, high chime, like a signal. Poirot moved at once, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. He bent to the case. Beneath the glass, a folded paper lay tucked under the bird's perch. "You are not as clever as you think," Hastings murmured, recalling the inked warning. Poirot's fingers hesitated only a fraction before he slid the paper out. It was a note.
"You're written in the same hurried hand as the inked line. If you want the truth, come alone to the terrace, now." Poirot looked up. The window stood open, black beyond. The terrace lanterns burned like watchful eyes. Somewhere out there, the murderer was offering a new stage and daring Poirot to step into it. Poirot folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Inspector Caldwell's protest came at once. "You're not going anywhere alone. It's a trap." "Of course it is a trap," Poirot replied. But the question is, who is trapped?" Poirot looked toward the terrace lanterns beyond the open window. "If I refuse, our murderer acts elsewhere. If I arrive with policemen, he disappears. But if I come as requested, he believes he holds the stage." Caldwell bristled. "And you mean to take it?" "Yes," Poirot said simply. "Keep your men inside, behind the drawing-room curtains. No shouting, no running, if you show yourselves, or you spoil what I must learn." In the vestibule, Poirot took a narrow silk scarf from a stand and draped it over his arm. Hastings leaned close. "Why the scarf?" "To signal," Poirot murmured. In the drawing-room, Poirot adjusted the curtains, leaving a thin slit. "If I touch my moustache," he whispered to Hastings, "open the door a little. If I touch the scarf, open it fully." He went out alone. The terrace was cold now, lanterns casting long shadows over the fete tables. Poirot crossed to the place where Sir Alistair had stood and stopped. "I am here," he said, softly. A voice answered from the far end, controlled, almost courteous. "You came." Poirot turned as though turning were his choice. "You invited me." A figure stepped into lantern light. Dr. Marcus Levin, pale and intent. In his right hand he held a small metal piece that glinted like a hinge. Poirot's tone remained gentle. "Doctor, you surprise me." Levin's mouth twitched. "You pretend not to see, or yet you see everything." "I see enough," Poirot said, "but I do not yet see why." Levin's eyes flicked to the exact spot of Sir Alistair's fall. Because he thought he could settle it publicly with witnesses as protection, he was wrong. "You were the blackmailer?" Poirot asked. "No," Levin said. "Harrow understands numbers. I understand bodies. Sir Alistair came to me asking how to make a man appear ill, how to frighten without leaving marks. He called it discretion. I called it corruption." "And yet you took his money," Poirot said quietly. Levin's composure cracked for an instant. because I told myself I was doing less harm than those who demanded it. Then he threatened to cast me off. He thought I would be silent because I had been useful. Poirot nodded once. So you killed him. Levine lifted the metal piece slightly. Everyone saw him die. No one saw me kill. Explain the blade, Poirot said. Levin's pride steadied him. A mounting under the table edge, a spring, the blade fixed upward, covered by cloth. When he rose, he leaned forward, hands on the table, chest over the edge. A touch with my foot released the catch. The point found the space between ribs. He looked puzzled. Then the heart stopped. And the fork? Poirot asked. A cue, Levine said. Eyes move, chairs shift. Marsh rises and becomes the story. In the confusion, I removed the blade, wrap it in his handkerchief. He left it on his chair, so neat.
So predictable. Poirot's left hand went to his moustache, delicately. In the drawing room, Hastings eased the door a fraction. Caldwell watched, tense. Levine's gaze sharpened. You signal them. I reassure them, Poirot replied. Levin stepped nearer the balustrade, lowering his voice. I did not summon you to confess. I summoned you because you interfere. And interference must be removed. He raised the hinge. There is another blade, not for Sir Alistair, actually for you. Poirot's eyes remained steady. And will everyone see? Levin smiled thinly. No, only you. Poirot's right hand brushed the silk scarf. At once, Hastings flung the door wide. Caldwell and two constables surged out. Levin whipped round, startled, and his hand jerked upward. Too late. Poirot stepped inside Levin's line and knocked the hinge from his grip with the scarf-wrapped forearm. It clattered across the stone. Caldwell seized Levin's wrists. Dr. Marcus Levin, Caldwell snarled.
You are under arrest for the murder of Sir Alistair Waverly. Levin's breath came hard. His eyes darted to Poirot. You think it ends with me? He hissed. Poirot bent, picked up the fallen hinge, and held it delicately between finger and thumb. No, he said softly. You will tell me, in order, who else knew, who else paid, and who else helped you place what everyone was meant to see. Levin struggled once, then seemed to sag, the fight leaving him as suddenly as it had come. You have no proof beyond my words, he said, trying for scorn, but his voice shook. Words, Poirot replied, are often the beginning of proof. He turned to Caldwell. Search his coat for the release cord or tool, and send at once to the terrace table. Lift the cloth carefully and examine the underside. You will find scratches where the hinge sat. Caldwell barked orders. A constable hurried away. In the doorway, figures gathered. Lady Evelyn, white-faced. A Benedict Harrow with an unreadable stare, and, held back by another constable, Clara Waverly, swaying but determined, her bandaged temple stark in lantern light. Poirot met Clara's eyes and inclined his head, a quiet promise. Then he looked back at Levin. You chose to kill in public, he said softly. Now you will speak in public too. We are almost ready for the final room for everyone tonight. The household was gathered once more in the blue drawing room before midnight struck. And the earlier terror had burned down into something steadier now, anticipation edged with dread. Outside, constables moved quietly across the terrace. From within the study came the muffled sounds of measured examination. The lanterns still burned beyond the windows, casting pale gold across the stone where Sir Alistair had fallen. Dr. Marcus Levin stood under guard near the mantel, his composure restored in fragments, though his eyes betrayed calculation even now. Benedict Harrow remained apart from the others, arms folded, watchful. Lady Evelyn sat upright, her grief contained within dignity. Clara, pale but resolute, had insisted on attending, one hand resting lightly against her bandaged temple. Inspector Caldwell stood beside Poirot. "Well," Caldwell said gruffly, "you asked for them assembled. Let's have it done." Poirot inclined his head and stepped forward, hands lightly clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began softly, "we have witnessed tonight not merely a murder, but a performance designed so that everyone would see, and therefore no one would truly observe." His gaze moved slowly across their faces. Sir Alistair Waverly chose the terrace, in daylight, surrounded by friends and associates. That choice was deliberate. He believed that witnesses would protect him. He intended, at precisely 4:30, to confront someone. Well, we know this from the telegram found in his desk. A ripple moved through the room. "He expected a reckoning," Poirot continued. Instead, he became part of a design far more intricate than he imagined. He turned slightly toward Dr. Levet. The weapon discovered in the conservatory was not a knife meant to be wielded. It was a component, a blade designed to be fixed, mounted beneath the edge of the table. When Sir Alistair rose and leaned forward, the device was triggered. The point struck upward, entering between the ribs. "Clean, precise, no cry, only surprise." Lady Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth. Poirot went on gently. The falling fork provided the essential misdirection. Eyes shifted, a chair scraped. Monsieur Marsh rose, briefly, and thus became the natural focus of suspicion. Julian Marsh, brought in under guard but no longer restrained, stood stiffly near Clara. His expression held both vindication and lingering disbelief. "The blade was removed in the confusion," Poirot said, "wrapped in a conveniently monogrammed handkerchief, hidden in damp soil and watered to erase disturbance, a gift for the inspector." Caldwell grunted but did not interrupt. Poirot faced Dr. Levin fully now. "You possessed the necessary anatomical knowledge. You understood exactly where to place the blade for immediate effect. And you had access, frequent, unquestioned access, to Sir Alistair's arrangements." Levin's lips curved faintly.
Circumstantial." "No," Poirot said softly. "Structural." He began to pace slowly. "You also knew of Sir Alistair's fear that someone wished him to appear ill. He confided in you. He asked about substances that could mimic heart distress. He trusted you." Levine's gaze hardened. "And when Sir Alistair resolved to end the arrangement, whatever form it took, you faced exposure." "Exposure to what?" Benedict Harrow interjected sharply. Poirot turned his head toward him. "To financial irregularities," he replied calmly. "Yes. There was fraud, off-book payments, pressure, perhaps even mutual blackmail." Harrow's jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. "But," Poirot continued, "financial scandal alone does not produce this sort of theatrical murder. That required something more personal." He stopped directly before Levin. "Resentment," he said quietly. "Resentment of being used as an instrument."
Resentment of being treated as discreet muscle rather than respected partner, and perhaps resentment of a man who believed he could manipulate both money and medicine without consequence. For the first time, Levin's composure cracked visibly. "He thought he could dismiss me," Levine said hoarsely. "After all I concealed for him, after all I adjusted, diagnoses, reports, certificates, he believed witnesses would save him. I showed him witnesses could be guided." Clara flinched. Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "you did." He lifted one finger. "But you made two errors." Levin's eyes flickered. "First," Poirot said, "you underestimated the psychology of your audience. Sir Alistair did not look afraid, he looked puzzled. That told me the strike was not from a visible assailant. It was unexpected, impersonal, mechanical. He raised a second finger. Second, you could not resist control. You planted the blade too perfectly. You added ink to the blackmail letter.
You sent for me. You needed to demonstrate superiority. Levin's voice sharpened. And you came. Yes, Poirot agreed gently. Because I knew you would. He stepped back. The attack on Mademoiselle Clara was the act of a man who saw his arrangement slipping. She defended Monsieur Marsh, therefore she threatened the clarity of your scapegoat, so you attempted to silence her and to deepen suspicion. Caldwell stepped forward. We found the mounting bracket under the terrace table, he announced.
Yeah, fresh scoring on the wood, matches the hinge in his pocket. A murmur ran through the room. Levin's shoulders sagged at last. It was elegant, Poirot said softly. Ingenious, a murder everyone saw. He paused, but not one they understood. Silence filled the drawing-room. Finally Lady Evelyn spoke, her voice steady despite tears. He trusted you. Levin did not answer. Constables stepped forward to escort him away. As he passed Poirot, he said in a low voice,
You enjoy this? Poirot met his gaze calmly. No, he said. I regret it. When Levin had gone, the room seemed larger somehow, as though tension itself had occupied space. Inspector Caldwell cleared his throat. Marsh will be released at once. Julian exhaled, turning instinctively toward Clara. She reached for his hand. Benedict Harrow remained by the window, thoughtful and troubled. Poirot regarded him briefly. As for financial matters, Poirot said mildly,
they may yet require daylight. Harrow inclined his head once, acknowledging the unspoken warning. The guests slowly dispersed, relief mingled with exhaustion. The house, so recently a stage, began to resemble a home again. At last, only Poirot and Hastings remained near the terrace doors. Hastings drew a long breath. Extraordinary, to kill a man in front of everyone. Yes, Poirot said softly, gazing out at the lantern-lit stone. But more extraordinary still is how easily we accept what we are shown. He adjusted his moustache with delicate precision. When many eyes look in the same direction, my friend, it is because someone has pointed. He turned away from the terrace. Fortunately, he added gently, my little grey cells prefer to look where no one points at all. And with that, Hercule Poirot prepared to depart Waverly Court, leaving behind a terrace washed clean by morning light.
And a lesson in how the most public of crimes may hide in the most private of motives.